Florence Pugh, Dua Lipa, Olivia Wilde. Literally every hot girl that likes to read has been raving about The Girls by Emma Cline, and I want to be a hot girl, so I went ahead and bought it. I noticed that the book is divided in four parts, so I'm thinking that I'll make the video like that. Like I'll read every part and then give my review on it. I wonder what's so great about this book that all these celebrities have been raving about it. All I know is that it's a coming of age book. It's Emma Cline's debut novel, and it's about the central character Evie joining a cult. And Florence Pugh and Olivia Wilde did Don't Worry Darling. So I kind of understand why they would be in this kind of a book. So yeah, I'm excited to read it. Let's see if I end up joining this hot girl gang or no. I just finished reading part one of this book. It's set in the late 1960s in California when hippie culture was really famous, and it was very usual for youngsters or teenagers to run away from home. So, this book is about Evie, and in part one, she's come across these girls and she gets to know that all of these girls live together at a ranch, and they're basically a cult, and the cult leader's name is Russell. And in part one, Evie has been really enamored by one particular character, Suzanne. It looks like it's very heavily inspired by Charles Manson and the Manson family. So I think it's a fictionalized tale with parts of true crime in it, which has made me even more excited because I'm such a true crime fanatic. And when I actually came across this book, I thought it must be a usual coming of age book, but it now it seems like it's so much more. And Evie is the child of divorced parents, and she comes from a decent family, like a well-off family. They have connections in Hollywood. And in part one, we are discovering Evie, what she thinks about her family, her relationships, and how she deals with boys. And there was this one quote that I really liked in the book. It really hit me. It said, all that time I had spent readying myself. The articles that taught me life was really just a waiting room until someone noticed you. The boys had spent that time becoming themselves. This quote really hit me because growing up, all of these female magazines like Cosmopolitan, 17, Teen Vogue, they always had articles about how we could impress our crush or how could we stand out, or it was so much about men and what we should do for men or what we can do for men. But do men ever think like that? I don't know. I think I just really, this quote really hit me. So part one has been really slow, but very exciting. Evie has now become a part of the cult, and I'm excited to see what actually happens in part two, three, and four. Because if you actually know anything about the Manson family, they did end up committing murders in the late 1960s. So is Evie a part of it? Does anything happen? What's gonna happen? Very exciting. Very excited to go ahead and read part two. I just finished reading part two of this book. Part two is a lot more fast paced, which I really enjoyed. I sometimes in during part one I felt like it was a little too slow. In part two, Evie has completely become a part of the cult. She's really, really taken by Suzanne, and she's constantly, like any other teenager, not able to see the signs of danger. Like she's suppressing signs of danger, she has desires and she pursues them like any other teenager. She convinces herself that people are good because she wants them to be. In part two, you can see the train wreck that is about to happen. You kind of want to jolt Evie out of it, but I think that's what makes part two so interesting. Her innocence and her vulnerability, you can really see it in this part. Since she's only 14, her moral compass hasn't really developed. She doesn't know if she's making the right decisions. And part two ends on such a cliffhanger. Oh, part two was really good. But the thing is, they've covered 72% of the book in part one and part two. So I think part three and part four are going to be really, really small. So let's see what they have in store for us. So I just finished reading part 3. The major thing that's building up in the book finally happens in part 3, which you can see that coming as a reader. It's been mentioned ever since part 1, or if you know anything about the Carlton Charles Manson, I am sure you know what I'm referring to. So that happens in part 3. But what actually interested me most in this part was how Evie responds to other women in her life, what she thinks about them, and how they influence her. In part 2, you understand the depth of Evie's emotions towards Suzanne. But in part 3, I think she now starts assessing why or how she feels about Suzanne, or if she has to compare other people to Suzanne, how are they? So in part 3, we're introduced to a new female character, Tamar, and I just want to read out a passage from the book about that. Tamar was different from Suzanne in a way that was easier. She was not complicated. She didn't track my attention so closely, didn't prompt me to shore up her declarations. When she wanted me to move over, she said so. I relaxed, which was unfamiliar. Even so, I missed Suzanne. Suzanne, who I remembered like dreams of opening a door on a forgotten room. Tamar was sweet and kind, but the world she moved in around seemed like a television set, limited and straightforward and mundane, with the notations and structures of normality. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There wasn't a frightening gap between the life she was living and the way she thought about that life. This passage just made me think about how sometimes we, at least romantically, gravitate towards people who are not stable. Maybe they cannot give us that stable environment, that kind of love that we want. And anytime we are with them, we are on our toes. And why don't we choose people who are somewhat mundane and who have some sort of structure to their life? I don't know if you've read the book Norwegian Wood by Murakami. It's also around those lines. I would highly recommend if you haven't read that book. So that was part 3. Most of it is covered in this 3 parts, so you can just skip part 4. I'm kidding, don't DNF, you've come so far, and it's a great read. In part 4, we'll see if Evie has any sort of repercussions or if anything ends up happening to her, if people come after her. So that should be interesting. This is Emma Cline's debut novel. Very, very good debut novel, I have to say. So I finished reading part 4, which means I finished reading this book. I can see why all of the It girls were raving about it. The way the author has described the female experience and what a young teenager goes through. Emma Cline, who's the author, has really gotten into the head of a 14-year-old girl and try to understand and articulate these experiences that she's having, all of the moral decisions that she's trying to make. I read on Goodreads that some people did not enjoy this style of writing. I really enjoy this style of writing where we have some sophisticated sentences, a lot of analogies. The book has a lot of cool visual imagery. There's not a lot of action, but it's also not really slow. Part 1 can feel a little slow, but I think it's fine. And let's not forget the setting of the book. It's set in the late 1960s and it's kind of about Charles Manson. So it made all of that made the book really, really interesting to read. I would recommend this book to any reader who really enjoys reading books which peel the layers of human conditions and the human mind, and why do we make certain decisions, and why are we attracted to certain people. So if you enjoy those kind of books, I think this one's for you. So yes, that was my review of The Girls by Emma Cline. I really enjoyed it. If there's any other book that you'd like me to review or comment on, or if you feel like I suck also and you did not like this book, just let me know in the comments. We can have a conversation about it. Thanks guys. I'll see you on the next one.